Good evening, everybody. And we are so happy that you are here. I think we will go ahead and get started, although others will be joining us as we move through. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to the Andre LeCouk Interreligious Lecture for 2026. We are so happy that you are here. My name is Kim Schultz, and I'm the Director of Interreligious Engagement and Public Projects here at CTS. And this annual lecture is a time for us to gather, honoring interreligious scholarship and leadership. And this year, Chicago Theological Seminary's Interreligious Institute created a series of offerings as the nation celebrates 250 years, and we here at CTS are celebrating 170 years anniversary of our founding with the theme Daring Faith in Dangerous Times. And much of our public facing work at CTS and the IRI specifically contributes to the braver, fuller, and more accurate story about religion in the United States. This year, we are happy for the LeCoque Lecture to welcome Dr. Peter Manseau of the Smithsonian, who will be in conversation with our own president, Dr. Brad Braxton. And we're going to hear more about both of those speakers in just a little while. I will say that Dr. Manseau posits that the United States was never a monolithically Christian nation, despite its best efforts. It is this very topic, a more honest telling of our country's spiritual diversity, that we hope to explore tonight. In addition, we have some amazing other guests. It's going to be a full evening. We have new music created tonight from our own Dr. Joanne Terrell. Later, we'll honor our Herman E. Schulman Interreligious Leadership Award winner and hear from him. And we also, hopefully, and I'm going to pause here to see if she has joined us. Junada, are you present?
She is not.
She is not. So hopefully she will join us later. So we're just going to pivot a little bit from the program. Improvise with me here, everyone. And hopefully we will meet Junada Petras in a little while, but we're going to start today instead with recorded music from our own Dr. Joanne Marie Terrell, who this year is celebrating her retirement/rewirement. And we were very honored. Dr. Terrell has been so present and such an important part of our interreligious work here at CTS. That honoring her, she has agreed to write a song for us and has recorded an a cappella song that she's written for this occasion. And so I think we will start with that in full gratitude to Dr. Terrell for all her years of service to CTS and to the students and to our community, and certainly to the interreligious work and the interreligious lecture. So Roxy, when you're ready.
We are healed when we love one another. We are healed when our love provides cover from the scourge of war and the pain of our scars, from the shame in our silence and the cold of indifference. We need to heal. Oh yes, there'll come a day when we can say, we are healed, we are healed, we are healed. We are healed when we know we're connected. We are healed when we shelter our sister and brother from the stormy blast and the pain of the past, from the grip of the mighty and every claim of supremacy. We need to heal. Oh, yes. There'll come a day when we'll say, we are healed, we are healed, we are healed. Healed to satisfy our needs, healed to sow our blessed seeds, healed to do a sacred duty, to make and find true beauty. Oh, yes, there'll come a day when we can say, we are healed, we are healed, we are healed. We are healed when we fight for what's right. We are healed when we love truth and light. Right now, in this moment, as we give our full consent to the one who made us, to the love that forgave us and bade us heal. I know there'll come a day when we will say, we are healed, we are healed, we are healed. We are healed, we are healed, we are healed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Terrell. Good evening, friends. I'm Rachel Mikva. I'm the Herman Schaalman Professor in Jewish Studies here at CTS and the Senior Faculty Fellow for our Interreligious Institute. We are so delighted to have Peter Manseau joining us. He is the founding director of the Center for Understanding Religion in American History at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. And in addition to his expertise as a historian and a museum curator, he's also a novelist. He's won a number of prestigious book prizes and fellowships, my favorite being the Prix Médicis étranger, which is awarded to the best foreign novel published in France. We were drawn to his work because of this remarkable book that he wrote called One Nation Under Gods. It reexamines America's story of itself, recognizing the tremendous spiritual diversity that's been here from the outset, that has built this nation and called it home. It is the story of the United States as revealed through the experiences of minoritized and often marginalized religious others. So we've asked our president, Dr. Brad Braxton, to get Peter talking about the long contested history of religious diversity in the United States, the pluralism that's so central to our institutional values. It's not a casual commitment, and it's not an easy achievement. It has been forged through conflict, exclusion, resistance, and moral struggle. And the better we understand this history, the more equipped we are for the work that's still ahead. So thank you both for bringing this very important conversation to us.
Thank you, Dr. Mikva, for that very gracious introduction. Greetings, CTS and Bayan family. It is a joy to welcome you to the Andre LeCook Interreligious Lecture, an annual gathering where we pause as a community to consider the stories that have shaped us and the stories that might yet heal us and save us. Human beings are storytelling creatures. Nations are too. Every society lives inside a narrative, some inherited, some contested, some waiting to be told. As I often remind leaders and community builders, the stories we bless become the stories that guide us. The stories we refuse to interrogate become the myths that bind us. Together, tonight, we will do the sacred work of examining the narratives that have shaped American religious identity and the sacred work of trying to imagine what a more honest, pluralistic story might make possible. In my own scholarly journey, I have learned again and again that excellence is never culturally neutral. As I wrote in a recent published article, the Academy has long privileged certain canons of excellence that elevates some voices while silencing others. Too often, those canons teach scholars, and especially scholars from marginalized communities, to distance themselves from the very people and traditions that form them. Yet, the most life-giving scholarship, the most morally compelling public work emerges when we honestly bless our origins rather than curse them, when we honor the wisdom of the diverse communities that have raised us, and when we allow diverse epistemologies to expand our imagination of what counts as knowledge. This is why the LaCocque Lecture exists, to widen the parameters of our collective imagination, to remind us that pluralism is not a polite ideal, but instead a rigorous discipline. To insist that the stories of this nation, its triumphs and its traumas, cannot be told truthfully unless we listen to the voices long pushed to the margins. And that brings us tonight to our guest and friend, Dr. Peter Manseau. Dr. Manseau has spent his career recovering the lost, overlooked, and deliberately forgotten stories of American religious life. His work at the Smithsonian has helped shape the nation's memory, sometimes correcting myths, sometimes complicating them, always expanding them. He invites us to see that America has never been a one-story nation. It has always been, as he writes, a nation under gods. And we thank you, Dr. Manseau, for that plural. That's exactly right. A history that is plural, contested, and intertwined. As we approach this 250th anniversary of the United States, the work of memory is not merely historical, it is moral. The stories we choose to tell now will shape the nation we become next. Dr. Manseau, we are honored to have you with us. Before we begin, a brief word about our conversational protocol. If you are comfortable, I would love for us to refer to one another by first name this evening. While we both respect the beauty of academic nomenclature, I hope we can create a space that feels more like a fireside chat. Open, curious, and grounded in mutual respect. If that, my friend, works for you, let's proceed in that spirit.
Okay. Yes, please call me Peter. And Brad, it's so good to see you. Thank you for the warm invitation to join you all here tonight to be part of your community. As I was listening to that beautiful music that preceded our conversation and hearing about all the ways we are healed, I was thinking that we are healed also when we learn from each other. And so I hope that we will do that tonight. I'm particularly pleased to join you because I don't know that I've mentioned, but I have a family history to Chicago Theological Seminary. My father, William Manseau, Reverend Dr. William Manseau, had been a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Boston. Ordained in 1961, but then left when he married my mother. But true to his searching ecumenical spirit, he arrived at CTS, where he studied in the early 1970s. And when I shared with him recently, and he's 90 years old, I shared with him that I would be giving the Andre LeCouk Lecture, and he told me that LeCouk was on his thesis committee. So this is I believe it was 1973 when my father was at CTS, which is shortly before I was born, when they moved back to Massachusetts. But the family lore has been that I was conceived in Chicago. So I'm back to my source here. So thank you so much for having me for all the reasons and specifically for that reason because it will make my father proud.
Oh my, in every way, we needed to have this grounding story, Peter. So this is more than just a fireside chat. This is a family reunion of
Yes,
sorts.
sir. Yes, sir.
How delightful. How delightful. You enrich us already by sharing that. Might we begin tonight by discussing what I often refer to, as do others, the politics of memory?
Yes.
And so here's the opening question. Your work, Peter, suggests that the stories we tell about American religious history, right, shapes who feels at home in this country and who does not. What do you see as the most urgent stakes today in telling a more honest, pluralistic story about American religious history?
Yes. I'm glad we're focused on stories. I think a lot about stories, both as a historian and as a novelist and a writer in various ways. And so I think a lot about the line of Joan Didion, essayist, middle of the 20th century, became really renowned. And she says famously, "We tell stories in order to live." And I believe that's true as a storyteller. Uh, but I think that when we ask ourselves to interrogate stories, and ask why they're being told, we realize that we tell stories in order to live, but we also tell stories to do many other things. We tell stories to establish power. We tell stories to um, create histories, create the foundations of the societies we claim we live in. We tell stories to draw boundaries, borders, determining who is in, who is out. We tell stories to define a community. And lately, I'm feeling that the the desire to tell one story above all others is seeking to do all those things we just outlined. Tell a story to establish power. Tell a story to establish who is in and who is out. So it's interesting to me to be talking about this book now because I wrote One Nation Under Gods in 2015, which was a very different time. It was a time If you'll remember, in the first inaugural address by President Obama, when he became the first president in history to cite that we are a nation of Christians and Jews and Muslims and Hindus and non-believers. That was that was the era in which this book emerged, an era in which American culture was coming to embrace more closely its religious diversity. 10, 12 years later, we find ourselves in a very different place where we do find the insistence on a single religious narrative to be on the rise. And we recognize, if we interrogate stories, that those stories that are told to establish power, stories told to draw boundaries and borders, stories told to define a community, they are also stories told to take away power. And they are stories told to determine who is outside the bounds of community. So, insisting that we are honest about all the stories that make this nation, we need to interrogate the ways in which we contribute to that desire for one story and the way we actively work against it. I spent a lot of time following 2019, 2020, thinking about the power of the 1619 Project by the New York Times and various historians. And I thought that one of the things that was most powerful about it was finding that simple turn of an expected date or frame of reference to move from 1620 to 1619, the real power in that. And as I've been thinking for the past decade about what type of simple turn we might make when we think about American religion, I think the power of moving from that under gods to under gods shows the real power of a single letter. What a single letter can do. How much meaning rests in that turn. How many more people are feel included, recognize their story in the large story we tell? So how do we continue to tell that story of the S and the undergods that make this nation what it is? I think that's really the crucial question that we face now.
Yes. What a capacious beginning, right? You have already established quite a canopy under which we can continue to discuss these topics tonight. I'm curious, and I'm not so much speaking politically, although there's something there, as much as I suppose I'm speaking maybe sociologically and otherwise. You talked about the trajectory we have been on over these last 10 to 12 years, and you cite the presidential address of President Obama, and obviously his deep connections to Chicago are what are animating me now. I remember, as you're talking about that, how much Islamophobia even Senator Obama's name evoked as he was running, right? And speaking even tonight in a marvelous family context where for the last several years, CTS has been so powerfully enriched by our Muslim siblings at the Bayan Islamic Graduate School. I'm curious if we might just riff a little bit about some of that kind of sociologically, what it meant to actually have a president who was mired in all of this. And perhaps this is something of a response or a reaction to the White House being held by a different embodiment and what that actually spoke to the nation. Can you say some more about that, please?
Uh, yes, the I think in many ways you've identified one of the foundational fears of our era. um, the the um, the immediate precedent to our current environment rested on this phobic fear focused on Obama, and and certainly entwined with that this projection that he was not born in the United States, that he was other in so many ways. And response to that certainly has had a lot to do with where we find ourselves now. But it's also interesting to think about the deep history of it, and particularly the history of Islam in America and how the number of times at which it has stood for an identifiable and feared religious other. Uh, going back to the first arrival of Islam in the parts of North America that would become the United States, Islam arrives with the slave trade, and it's estimated that 10–15% of those who arrived from West Africa had some connection to Islam when they arrived. So, Islam, in that sense, is a founding American religion, along with Christianity, just in terms of the sheer population size that was coming. And though we see beliefs like that fall away for obvious reasons, we also find elements of them absorbed into the soil and growing back up and becoming parts of other traditions. Uh, and much more recently in history, of course, you find Islam as a presented through media representations as a threat to American society in the 1960s, for example, with particularly when you think about a figure like Cassius Clay becoming Muhammad Ali and the media storm around that. It really signified again something that Islam has meant to American history at these very different, very identifiable periods, that whether or not everyone engaged in the Islamophobia targeted at President Obama, there it is in the cultural background. That too is in the soil that has grown up to inform the world we live in now.
So rich, so rich. You are, my friend, you are making it challenging for me because I have a whole roster of questions, but I'm not sure I want to move off of this first one just yet. Uh, so I just saw something. I'm going to try to be somewhat responsive to the chat, although we'll have some time for Q&A. But I did see arise in the chat that Dr. Terrell has placed before us also the notion of President Obama's deep connection to Black Christianity, which became something of a moment, right, in that campaign
Yes.
and after. And what this comment in the chat also makes me think, and I'm curious just to hear you say a little something about this, is that great line from, I think it was Du Bois, who suggested that it took the Black church, quote unquote, in America about 150 or 200 years to become Christian.
Mm.
In other words, even within Black Christianity, you've got all of this stuff bubbling under the surface from African traditional religion and Islam and other retentions, so that even what seems like a sociological kind of monolith is itself a story of pluralism. And in some very profound ways, President Obama is nurtured by this at a Trinity United Church of Christ, which is so decidedly Afrocentric. So I'm
Yes.
curious how you hear again that Obama represents something in the shifting of how American history is being mediated, which is
Yes.
why the response and the reaction has been so profound over the
Yes.
last
Yeah.
decade.
Well, what strikes me is the understanding or the description of Black religion, Black American religion you just gave, that is drawing upon all these different sources. And we're currently putting on at the American History Museum. We're about to put on a program, a daily theater program based on the ring shout, and so the that will allow museum visitors to come in and learn this particular sacred ritual created among the enslaved populations, mainly in the Carolinas, uh, mixing African rhythms with biblical content and creating this newly American praise worship form. Uh, and so, thinking a lot about that and doing research around this ritual that in some ways precedes the Black church. It's interesting to me to look back at the history and see that those worship forms that were born in that community become so popular that they begin also to influence revivals that are fully integrated. And so you find you that I think it is even a larger we're talking about a larger form of intermingling of religious differences that even is not within the American cultures, not even really, as has historically been thought by so many, racially divided, that all of these influences are influencing each other. And so you find, for example, in thinking about the ring shout, you find Methodist ministers around Philadelphia in the 1820s complaining that everyone is starting to dance in this circular way that they've seen that previously they had seen in the South. And so I'm really interested in the way these religious influences can go unseen, but still be very potent. The way they move beneath the surface and then they emerge in ways that may not even be recognized by those who've been carrying them all this long. They may not have the same names for them anymore. But these traditions, they are part of American DNA and they emerge in various ways, including in a figure I would say like Barack Obama.
Beautiful. My sense, Peter, is that if we had heard one or two more frames of Dr. Terrell singing "We Are Healed," a ring shout would have started, even in this Zoom lecture hall. I mean, we were the ring shout. I was getting ready to lead the ring shout, but I digress. On to perhaps a second topic now. You have written about American history often being narrated from the Christian middle. What do we lose morally, politically, spiritually, when we refuse to see the margins, when it's always focused on the quote middle?
Yeah. I think we lose the truth. I think it's living in a house and never going in your yard. You know, it's missing out on the full story, which is part of the story of the middle, even if the middle doesn't realize it. What's interesting to me and what I tried to capture in the book is not just the stories of those in on the margins, those who represent minority faiths, but the ways in which those communities and those traditions come to have outsized influence, such that these very small communities come to influence the majority community in ways the majority community may not even recognize. They may not be able to identify, but that influence is there inevitably. I have an understanding that there is this mutual co-creation going on by majority and minority religious groups. That they are never wholly separate. They live on the same street. They may not go to the same places for worship, but they are in community with each other and they influence each other that way. And I believe it makes us um, more and better of whoever we want to have a better understanding of those who are around us.
You spoke earlier about the simple turn, and I just want to identify what a very simple and yet profound turn you just offered us in the phrase mutual co-creation. That's good, doctor. Thank you, sir. That is very good, especially given how at times, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, how hell-bent some religious communities seem in this moment to engage in one-upsmanship. Right? We must crush all other stories so that we can pound our chest around our story. And yet you offer that simple turn of folks living on the same street, being in the same neighborhood, still honoring difference, but there is a creative process that
Yeah.
maybe makes us better and more. That's a great turn, Peter. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. You know, I think in every city in the nation, you will find buildings that have been synagogues, became churches, became mosques. And those stories to me, while they do represent moments of one population coming in and another moving out, they also represent this common building, common construction of the edifice of American religion that we're all part of. And it also suggests to me that this story is never done. You don't know yet what work you're doing now, what improvements you're making to the building are going to be used by the next community to come in and rent the space. So I think that
Mm.
we are, if we, the more we acknowledge that we are in community that way, even with those we would never suspect we are. I think we're all the better for it.
The atmosphere is replete tonight because of your leadership, Peter, with so many wonderful images and phrases. Having talked about the buildings and architecture and materiality, this is a wonderful setup. Perhaps the gods are at work tonight as we are talking, because I want to talk about museums, right? Because you and I connected and became colleagues during the time that I was privileged to serve as a curator at the Smithsonian. And so, as a curator at the Smithsonian, you are helping to shape the nation's memory. Speak to us, please, about how museums help correct or sometimes reinforce our national myths about religious identity.
Yeah. I also feel very privileged to work in a museum. It seems to be one of the few spaces, particularly the Smithsonian museums. They are one of the few spaces that pierce the media bubble, pierce all media bubbles. Uh, Many people only receive information that's highly curated for them by um, the owners of broadcast systems and by various algorithms. It's very rare for all of us, I think, myself included, certainly, to be able to have those boundaries removed, those blinders removed from us, and to step into a space that is for everyone. So, Smithsonian museums receive millions of visitors every year. They come from all over the country, all around the world, every education level, every socioeconomic level. Currently, Smithsonian is overrun by school groups from all over the country. Buses clog all the roads, but it's great. They come in ready to learn. And so we have a great opportunity to be able to share American religious history with them in a way that is expansive, expansive in such a way that may surprise many people. But entering into a museum, I've always found, uh, prepares you for a unique type of learning in which you are passing through, you are moving through and understanding that every part of the environment you're in is there for you to learn from. That is its explicit purpose. It's its explicit purpose, and that's why you're there. So particularly for these school groups, it seems like a great opportunity to share this type of history. And it's particularly important because of the assumptions people have about American religious history that they bring with them everywhere. And so, doing our best to identify those and not to shout them down, but to expand them, that seems to be that's the real work. And I think that we see it specifically with an understanding, a very common understanding that America was founded as a Christian nation. There are reasons people believe that. I understand them. And so to encounter that idea, rather than to argue it down, to present it as part of a larger story. That yes, there have always been people who have understood that the United States should be a Christian nation, and they are part of this much larger story of all these other people. And once you can frame something in such a way that you are not saying, no, you are wrong, but rather, yes, there is more, they will, I find that people generally, museum goers specifically, perhaps, they're very receptive to that.
Yes, there is more. I don't have to preach this Sunday, but if I did, that might be my sermon title. Professor, that's wow. That's a wonderful phrase. And thank you for mentioning springtime at the Smithsonian. It's a thing, isn't it, Peter? It's its own thing. You remind me of a moment. It was in the spring when I was at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We had 10,000 people in the museum on one day alone, right? So a real keen sense of the public nature of the work, this diffusion of knowledge that the Smithsonian is was created really to be about. I'm curious as I hear you reflect on the materiality, right, of museums and the way in which people, as they encounter artifacts, are opened up. Is there a particular artifact in any of the Smithsonian museums or artifacts that have just grabbed your imagination and that themselves, just the materiality of it, helps to tell a different story or complicate this uniform story? Say more about the material history over which you have stewardship.
Sure. I mean, I'm in the museum business because I love stuff. I love things. I really started on my career path because I wanted to be Indiana Jones, and I ended up really drawn to the things that such a person would find. So I'm really drawn to that because I find that real things, objects from history, they work like time machines for visitors, and for me, working with them, to stand in the presence of something and be able to do the imaginative work of imagining all the other millions or hundreds of thousands of people who might have stood by it to view it, and those who made it and who saved it. And to connect across the centuries in that way through this little portal of an object. It's really meaningful to me. And I think it's particularly useful when thinking about American religion because there's so much wonderful material culture around American religion. Many of my favorite objects in the museum will be featured in our upcoming religion gallery, which we're opening at the end of next year. Um,
Yes.
but I'm not supposed to reveal them. So I'm going to mention something.
Okay. That's a great tease, Peter. Real good.
You'll have to come back and visit us at the end of the year. But I will mention an object I've shown in previous exhibits, and it's really to me a, a really, it's particularly in this 250th year, it's a really evocative object about the religious ideas of some of the founding generation. So this is a book that's known as the Jefferson Bible. This is uh, Thomas Jefferson, in his retirement at Monticello around 1820, was spending a lot of time reading Christian scriptures, and he felt that he wished that he had a condensed version of the Gospels. So Thomas Jefferson, being a very crafty man, got out a penknife and some glue, and he proceeded to cut away from the Gospels everything with which he didn't agree. So the miracles, the supernatural. Jefferson didn't have any time for it. He took it all out, and what was left was a book that he called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, showing through the scraps that Jefferson left behind, showing the words of Jesus, the movements, the actions of Jesus. And Jefferson thought that was what was most interesting and useful about Christian tradition were the teachings of Jesus, the ways by which he defined himself as a Christian. So I like this object, which we have in the collection. It is a leather bound book. It's about 88 pages, and it's just Jefferson's cut and paste version of the Gospels. I really like this book because it so perfectly complicates some of those notions about the founding of the nation being of Christian in character that I mentioned a moment ago. It allows you to say, yes, some people at the time believed this, but look what an amazing heretic the third president of the United States was, someone who would take it upon himself to craft his own version of scripture. And so to be in the presence of that book and to know that Jefferson had toiled over it, had sweat over it. When we were preparing it for its first display in many years back in 2011, some of the conservators even found a small hair within the binding. So that's how closely Jefferson was working to create this personal scripture of his. So be able to show that, to present that as part of a spectrum of American religion, as we did in our exhibit, Religion in Early America, to show that this is one story among all these many stories. It's a great kind of portal, as I mentioned, to feel like you're standing in the presence of Jefferson, of his ideas, and also of this entire era of this hidden religious diversity.
What a compelling response, Peter. Thank you. Wow. Continuing in the vein of sources, and I'm also thinking about tonight the number of doctoral students who are with us tonight and who will also view this lecture on demand. How do you decide when working with particularly fragmentary or overlooked sources? How do you decide which voices to recover and to privilege? And what are some of the ethical responsibilities, right, of mediating those voices afresh for a current generation?
Yes. Uh, that is a very important question. So I feel that in many of my projects, I do feel like I'm in conversation with those who I am writing about, whose experiences I am trying to understand. And so to not do the work of simply scavenging from history, but to engage both with the words themselves and the circumstances from which people might have created them. So what I did with One Nation Under Gods was to try to find one of those stories full of voices that needed to be brought back from every generation, every American generation. So through this 500-year history, to knit together um, that desire to elevate voices throughout American history and find ways to allow them to tell the stories on their own. So sources that I most enjoy working with, or I most find that answers this question, are those that are written to be shared, to give one's own account of experiences, and to know that you're working with words that wanted to be put out into the world, histories that wanted to be known, even if they can't, if even if they weren't heard earlier by all those who might have heard them. So having some sense that um, those who I'm writing about would want their story to be more broadly known. That was one of the defining elements of the stories that I chose to bring to the surface in the book.
Given the depth of your scholarship and the scope of your curatorial work, are you able these days to engage? I'm thinking about, young learners. I'm thinking about folks who are in high school or junior high or religious groups. Are you able to do that kind of public facing work now? Or have you been able to do much of that? I'm just curious about that.
Well, again, we are in high school group visiting season at the museum, so I'm surrounded by middle schoolers all day, and we do try to put on programs that are specifically designed with them in mind. That was the origin of our Shout program, well, it's a ring shout program that we call simply Shout, was seeing all these school groups coming in and feeling like they had a lot of energy and they wanted to move. And so giving them a way to move, to learn this historical movement and that history, to
Mhm.
channel all of that adolescent and pre-adolescent energy is really a
Yes.
wonderful opportunity. So what we're doing with religion at the museum is not only opening this new long-term exhibit, but designing programs in an ongoing way that directly target the young people who come into the museum by the millions, and hoping that they come
Yes.
away with this understanding, not necessarily of particular religious traditions, but of this big story, an understanding of
Yes.
whatever tradition they brought in with them to the museum, or they might have at home. They are part of something larger. And just being able to experience that, to have their perspective open that way, that's the real work of the museum.
Beautiful. I really appreciate the notes that you're sounding here around embodiment and kinesthetics. Prior to coming to CTS, I was actually a chief diversity officer at a junior kindergarten through eighth grade school where I think I may have done some of my most rigorous intellectual work. And so much of it was about the kinesthetics, right? The embodiment that is required when you're dealing with younger learners and
Yes,
what that does, particularly for scholars, like us who sometimes just get caught in the cognitive and don't also learn the lessons that the body clearly has to teach us. So thank you for
yes.
sounding that. And feel free to speak more about the kinesthetics and
Oh,
the embodiment.
it's just that one of the goals that I've had in my work is to remind people that I don't have to tell anyone on this call that this is true, but others outside of our sphere of our sphere of academic influence need to be reminded that religion isn't necessarily boring. It is a subject that finds its way into every part of life and of culture, from movement, as you mentioned, to all kinds of arts, to sports, and showing especially young audiences that there is this hidden dimension of the many of the things that they may be engaging with, and that truly religion is everywhere in American culture. So helping using things like movement or references to culture that they may find more appealing than anything I might cite from the 17th century. They using those ways in with particularly with younger audiences has been I think that's been a key for reaching our objectives.
How fitting. Thank you for emphasizing that. When you were talking about the multiple ways, right, that our narratives work, you mentioned an operative word for me in a lot of my work, and that is the word power. And of course, as someone who works in a theological community, I spend a lot of time trying to remind religious leaders that power is not a bad topic, right? It's inherently neutral. So I'm really curious to think about power some more and also the role of conflict, because part of what we're trying to do at CTS and Bayan is help to further equip conflict intelligent people, right? That conflict has a role. There's a constructive conflict. Obviously, there's a horrific element of conflict as well that the world needs much, much less of. So let's just work on this conflict theme a little bit. You argue that pluralism emerges not so much from tolerance, but from conflict. So, what contemporary conflicts do you think are shaping the next chapter of American religious life? And I mean that in a very fulsome way, that there is constructive and there is also destructive conflict. Speak
Yes.
about conflict a little bit for to me.
Oh, sure. One of the projects I'm most proud of having been part of over the past several years was the effort by a lot of a community of scholars and journalists and just those who were watching American culture to record and catalog the religious influences on the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Oh,
And we, but through a collaboration between the Smithsonian and the University of Alabama's Department of Religion, we created an online resource called Uncivil Religion, uncivilreligion.org, where we gathered, I believe it was 18 essays about the way in which religion showed up on January 6th and uh, media galleries that are deep with video and images showing all the different religious symbols that were present at the Capitol that day. And I
mm,
mentioned that because it was a fascinating moment, a tragic moment for the nation's history and its future. But for a historian of American religion, it was a fascinating thing to watch unfold because it was this conflict between two understandings of power, between the capital standing for democracy for the nation on the one hand, and the mob approaching the Capitol um, with things to break down windows and push over Capitol Police, and constantly under the banner of various religious imagery. So to think about the clash between those two understandings of power, especially when until recently, I'm I'm chasing a thought, especially when one part of that conflict between power believed that it was not separate from the meaning of the power that it was attacking, if you follow what I mean. Um,
mm, mm.
the different relationship between those two power dynamics. So that
Yes.
to me is a defining conflict going forward for American religious diversity between this desire for there there to be one religious voice, one religious story versus the symbol of a multi-faith, multi-religious democracy. That I think is
Yes.
the conflict that we are going to continue to see play out, captured so tragically on that day. So if anyone was not keeping track of that day, I recommend just refreshing one's memory about the ways in which religious symbols, the phrase I used at the time, provided a psychological safety net for those carrying out this attack on their government. So thinking about the way, I think interrogating the way that religious symbols often provide that safety net for all manner of attacks and injustice. How could it be wrong when I have this religious symbol flying above me, when I have these religious ideas in my heart? How could I be doing wrong? Uh, so understanding that conflict, I think, is vital to understanding where we go next.
This work on uncivil religion, that's brave work, Peter. That's really brave. It's creative and it's also brave. And what it calls to mind for me is perhaps a question around resistance. So as you are doing this kind of work, when there are narratives that are so entrenched, I'm curious to know what kind of resistance have you encountered when you are challenging these national myths and exposing and interrogating in the ways that you are?
Well, I did when the book came out and I went on a bit of a tour about it. I can remember giving a talk, um, giving a talk, and someone shouting from the audience, a talk in a church, I should say, and someone shouted
Okay.
from the audience, um, "I'm sick of this BS." And so I have faced resistance up close. Uh, and at the time, really, I was expecting more resistance than I originally faced with suggesting that there were this broader way of thinking about it. But again, to harken back to the beginning of our conversation, it was a different moment, and it feels in some ways that the argument the book is making has become more vital, needs to be reiterated now. Um, um, I'm sorry that I forgot the thrust of your question, Brad.
No, just about the nature of the resistance that you have faced.
Oh, well,
Yes.
yeah. Well, I stopped at my at at my heckler. But in my work, I've been gratified that there has not been as much resistance as there might be yet one day, but that there is, I think, an intuitive understanding when you find the right way to frame these stories. There is an intuitive understanding that yes, the story is always bigger, even if I believe that there is one story and there should be one story standing with primacy above others. There are always other stories. I think when you
Yes.
encourage people to understand their own lives and their own connections, to think about their families, there are always other stories in a family. So to broaden the scope rather than um, rather than making an argument, and this was a choice I made when I decided to approach these stories the way I did. If you remember early in the 2000s, there was a lot of back and forth between were we founded as a Christian nation or no, we were not founded as a Christian nation, as a series of polemics and of selective quoting on both sides to try to make it seem that it was certainly one way or the other, Christian or secular. But instead, what I hope to do is to show that both those arguments are part of the story because it is a vast story. It is a growing story. It is a story as messy and complex as anything that has shaped the nation. So um, pleased that the narrative approach to the telling of human stories has seems to have found a way to avoid any particular resistance.
This is such an inspiring and expansive conversation. And I have maybe just another one or two queries because I do not want to be selfish. There are others who I know will want to engage you later in the evening. Given the polarization, Peter, of our moment, are you hopeful about the future of American pluralism? What gives you hope? What makes you feel a sense of caution or maybe dread or awe? Feel free to speak candidly about that.
Mm. I am hopeful. Like a lot of people, I probably my hope is on a pendulum. I'm sure, of course, it swings back and forth, but I am hopeful in the big picture sense. Hopeful because I am in the business that I am, in the business of American history, because I love this country. I love the big mess of it. I love the complicated history. I love it enough not to let it be a single story, to insist that it's always been more than one story. And that's what makes it interesting. And that's what has led it to create any great work of art that has emerged from this nation and its people. It is because of that tension between difference, um, the mutual co-creation that we talked about, that is part of all of it. And I see that every day as much as I see things that um, worry me, that infuriate me. I also see um, I see what I love of this country every day, and that gives me hope.
I do just want to go back and pick up for a moment for our faculty colleagues. We have all these emerging scholars who are being trained and are finishing degrees. May it be the lot of all of us as lecturers to have someone so interested in our work that they actually stand up and shout, I'm sick of this BS, right? I didn't want to let that moment pass. That was such a wonderful moment, right? So much of our work sometimes doesn't seem to create the kind of provocation that we would desire. And so I want to celebrate in all seriousness what one of my mentors and the first dean under whom I served taught me was that education, right? Deep intellectual work at its best is provocation in the most noble sense of that word. So thank you for all the ways you are provoking us, Peter, even if you get obscenity shouted at you in the church. Go figure, right? Go uncivil religion. There it is. I will conclude our time together just with this final query. If people were to remember a thing or two or three, because we want to emphasize the plural, the God. So I'm not asking you for necessarily one thing, but if you have it, but what things ultimately do you want to put in a to-go box for people tonight in your work? What should we take away with us in our boxes?
I think I would just I think I would leave you with two real points, which are just my takeaways from the written work I do as well as the museum work. Um, and the first is that you can't understand American history without understanding religion. That there have been efforts, including in my museum, which is a federal institution, um, for decades, long before I arrived, actively avoiding religion because it's potentially controversial and because it seems to be not something that a federal institution should engage with. But at a certain point, my colleagues before I arrived came to understand that you're missing so much. You're missing so much of people's lived experience. You're missing so much of culture. You're missing so much of the ways we make meaning unless you directly engage with the rich diversity of religious traditions in American history. And the second point that I hope to leave you all with, and which has come to define my work, is that American religious history has always been diverse. Uh, we have only been formally calling ourselves one nation under God for 70 years or so, since the 1950s, for a variety of complicated political and religious reasons. But unofficially, informally, we have always been one nation under God's. It is the founding tension. It is a founding tension of the creation of the United States and of everything that came before it. So understanding that, again, the that single letter, all the meaning a single letter can carry, all the stories it can contain, that we have always been a religiously diverse nation. And that is not something that hindered our growth as a nation. It fostered it, facilitated it, and it continues to do so. So those are my two to-go box takeaways.
If every family reunion were this fun, I would never miss one. What a wonderful conversation to have with you. I do want to say, as I prepare to turn things over, that Chicago Theological Seminary is a very sticky community, so you're not going to get away from us, even if you try, right? That we are so delighted that we have this more formalized connection with you. And I just want to thank you, Peter, because in a really profound way, you have reminded us tonight in your own words, yes, there is more. And in doing so, you have helped us to see that excellence is not just about the intellect. It is clearly about that. And it's also about imagination. And so what has been so delightful in this conversation with you is the way in which through your scholarship and your curatorial work are helping us to imagine something different. And I'll simply conclude by saying it is possible for us when we're not at our best to cling to old narratives that constrain us. And it is also possible, and this is what you are doing so powerfully, Peter, to co-create narratives that are big enough, capacious enough for all of us. So thank you for the generous and generative work of reminding us over and over again, yes, there is more. I turn it back over to you, Kim, and Dr. Mikva and our colleagues for continued dialogue and the rest of the program. Many thanks, Peter. What a delight.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you both so much. I'm actually just going to pass it to Heather El-Sayed, who is going to lead us in a Q&A. Thank you both so much for that very intriguing conversation. Heather.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you both so much for a great conversation. So much to think about here and to take home. I have a lot of notes in my notebook. For those who may not know me, I'm Heather El-Sayed. I'm a graduate of Bayan Islamic Graduate School, as well as a current PhD student with CTS. And so I'm here to take your questions if you want to put them in the chat, but I do have a few of my own if that's okay. So one of the questions that was coming up while you were talking and looking at the world that we're living in today, and you had written your book, I believe, in 2015. I wrote it down, so I'm going to read it. The question that I have is that we have so many narratives, right? And as historians and as academics, we look back at narratives that have been written, we try and make sense, we archive, we uplift voices. And so my question is, with the world that we're in right now with social media, we used to look at travel journals and we still do, but vlogging is so popular right now, and we see a lot of vlogging and capturing of narratives at points of difference. So I was just wondering, in your expertise, where do you see the social media vlogging that are, 10, 15 years from now? These are collections that are happening right now that are going to be historical of what's happening in the world that we're in right now and even in the future. So I was just wondering, where do you see the social media aspect and the just studying the archives and then putting that into research?
That's a great question. It's an active field within the museum world. This idea of digital first collecting and what does it mean and what does it enable? It's of course difficult because that's an understatement. It's even given the vast archives created by the past that we've managed to maintain, the digital archive just grows at a rate uh, exponentially larger than that. And also, it is still untested in terms of how long various media can be maintained. I mean, those of us who've come of age listening to music in ever new forms know that certain media lasts and certain media doesn't, certain media degrades, and so things can be lost. I know that the earliest part of my work, earliest part of my career, was involved a lot of online publishing, work that at the time felt would stand forever, but eventually disappears. So I think that one important point to make is to not rely on something being online as always being there. If there is a particular body of work that you want to have track of, that you want to keep track of for your research, for your own archival purposes, trying to find a way to do that. When it's ethically appropriate, but making your own personal archives of things you might want to refer back to. The Uncivil Religion project I mentioned is very much a digital archiving project, and it gathered sources from all over. Because if you remember, in the aftermath of January 6th, we were awash in media about it. But a lot of that has just gone the way of much of the internet and disappeared. Others have been intentionally silenced. So trying to anticipate and work around those eventualities, I think, is an important part of doing research. In my own specifically written work following January 6th, I published an article in the Washington Post about the religious path of one of the January 6th rioters, how he managed to be the first one um, to travel from Kentucky to Washington, D.C., and to be the first one through a broken window into the Capitol. What was that religious journey? And that relied, interestingly, on, he wouldn't have called it this, but on vlogging of a very long video that he gave and put on Facebook and made it public, where he basically gave the story of his radicalization that led him to be part of this attack. And that too is something that would have been lost had it not been saved at the moment you see it,
Oh,
so that you can tell the stories that you think need to be preserved.
thank you for that. And I like what you said about what's ethically appropriate as well, and keeping that in mind when using, different social media channels for your work. I do have one more question. In your book, I was so pleased to read about Omar ibn Said, an enslaved African American Muslim scholar from the 19th century, and he wrote in Arabic on the walls of his jail cell in North Carolina. And I just wanted to ask, how does his story and the fact that up to 20% of enslaved African Muslims upend our understanding of the religious makeup of early America?
Well, I think that many of the stories that are told about religion in early America, and particularly the easy way in which people would talk about the preponderance, the vast majority of Protestant Christians. Um, those assessments and those descriptions often rely or often rest on a foundation of the question, who is counted and why? Um, whose religious experiences are understood to be, in the judgment of historians of various eras, authentic and real and worth counting, and whose are practices that we will not deign to call religion. So the with the arrival of Islam among enslaved Africans to North America, that was just one of many religious systems that were arriving as part of colonial America and then enslavement in the young United States. And all of these traditions are virtually erased by history, by the inability of enslaved people to practice their faiths. And so when that community begins in different places to adopt Christianity in very large numbers, some of those traditions, which seemed to have disappeared, were maintained within communities and within families and become part of that tradition that historians may then deign to call a religious tradition. But they are often reliant on these traditions that have gone underground and emerged much later in ways that might not be recognized.
Thank you so much for that. We do have a few questions in the chat, if I can share those.
Mhm.
Um, Wendy Diaz asks that she shared that her son is a history major and avid writer. Being a museum curator would probably be his dream job. He's interested in pursuing religious studies. So, what advice do you have for young people who would like to pursue such a career?
Well, it's my dream job, so I understand. I hear where he's coming from. And it's also a job I never intended to end up in. So I'm not sure if I could really chart chart a course to it, but I can explain my own experience and how I got here. I studied religion as an undergrad at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, always with an understanding that I wanted to write about it. And so then after I graduated, I spent about a decade trying to be a writer, trying to write stories about religion and American history for any place that would publish me, and eventually leading me to create a publication of my own to do that. And only after I had been out in the world, experiencing and meeting people in their own lived religious experiences, did I go back to graduate school at Georgetown. I got my PhD in their fairly new program at the time in religious pluralism. And that happened to bring me to Washington at just the right time to become part of the museum while they were beginning to think about engaging with religion in a new way. But as it happens, it is really a boom time for museums engaging with religion. There are other people with jobs like mine now all over the country, curators of religion at museums large and small. at art museums, at history museums. Much of this is thanks to an initiative by the Lilly Endowment called the Religion and Cultural Institutions Initiative, which to date has provided funding to some 40 museums to engage with religion in new ways, to try to increase the public understanding of religion, so that visitors at museums can learn history in an unbiased and a fair in a fair way, in a way that recognizes the contributions and celebrates them of American religious history, but also doesn't shy away from engaging with some of those harder stories. So it's a great time for religion in museums. So I encourage anyone who's interested to think about it.
That's excellent advice. Thank you so much. We have a question from Jimmy Payton. Dr. Manseau, what are your thoughts on what enables the American civil religion, or we might say white Christian nationalism, to sustain such senseless acts of violence against those they deem religious other?
Um, what I would say is that there have been strains of this type of religiosity through many other times um, in American history, and it is a recurrent theme, which doesn't make it any easier to live through, but does allow us to look back and recognize that certain ideas come in and go out like a tide, and sometimes that it can be broken, and other times it is endured. So I learn a lot through my study of American history, particularly lately the understanding the religious foundations of the spasm of nativist violence that happened in the middle of the 19th century, at the time it was considered that Catholics were the arriving um, religious other that needed to be constrained and deported, and understanding that that too rested on this moment of they didn't have the term, but it's very much like what we would consider to be white nationalism now. So understanding those precedents from history, um, on the one hand, they aren't encouraging because it means that something virulent keeps coming back. But on the other hand, to recognize that communities endure, they overcome, they always have, and to hope for a, a bringing back of that history as well as the darker elements.
Thank you so much. We have time for one or two more questions. I have one here from Bill Rice. How do we stay true to our own, sometimes exclusivist tradition and relate to people with very different traditions? What would you recommend, or how to navigate?
I think it's an understanding of ourselves being part of community. I think that it's easy to feel within specific church walls or walls of other houses of worship. This is my community, but recognizing that um, those institutions too are part of a broader community, and um, we all are making the world together. I think just remembering something as basic as that, um, even if you don't understand the beliefs of someone who lives next door, they are your neighbor. How do we live together? The very practical pluralism, I think, that is the real bedrock of the nation, and understanding that. Um, in a nation like this, there are going to be people from all over with all kinds of different beliefs. And to understand that that is enriching, you may learn something different, rather than a threat, I think is something to worth working towards reminding oneself, though difficult though it can be.
I appreciate that. It's very important to remember that not a threat. Absolutely. We do have one more question. Dr. Mikva asked, she shared, I loved your approach in Under Gods to broaden the scope of the stories we hear rather than make an argument, or as your way of making an argument. Can you share one story that you believe has been particularly transformative, expanding the vision of those who hear it?
Oh, I think one story that was so many stories shuffling through my head. It's like I'm drawing a tarot card here. Um, but I think the story that I think about most often because it was the last I added to the book. After I wrote the book, it was supposed to be a 500-year history. My editor said, you're missing something in the sort of in the middle of the 20th century. Is there a story you can tell in there? And that's when I really began to understand the experience of the Japanese incarceration during the 1940s, during World War II, in response to the war with Japan. Japanese Americans of Japanese ancestry all along the West Coast were moved inland to relocation centers, which at the time were often termed as concentration camps to isolate these communities. And the part of the story that I learned was that it was the religious minorities among the Japanese Americans who were the first targeted. Those who were thought to have immediate connection to Japan were Buddhist priests or Shinto priests. And so that the experience of that religious minority and the way that that particular religious tradition was used to understand this experience of being incarcerated by your own country, that was enlightening to me because it helped me understand the ways in which my own understanding of American history has been shaped by all the Christian narratives that come to mind when we think about the city on the hill or we think about pilgrims. And to think about a community using an entirely different religious sensibility, a different set of religious stories to make sense of their part of American history was enlightening to me, to help me understand that there are many different religious lenses that one can use in American history. And we can learn from all of them. In fact, it teaches us a great deal about who we are as a nation, as a people all together, to be able to view each other through these different lenses. So that's a story that changed my perspective, and it really tries to, I hope, to bring it with me into the work I do in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that with me and with all of us. I think that's all the time that we have for our Q&A. And just a reminder to everyone that's joining us, please check the chat box for important announcements as well as links that you may have been asking for. Thank you so much for allowing us some time for a Q&A session.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Munir, if you are ready.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Manseau. That was really remarkable. I'm here to introduce the winner of the Rabbi Herman E. Schaalman Award for this year. Rabbi Schaalman was introduced to CTS in the 1980s through Dr. Andre LeCouk. Rabbi Schaalman, like Dr. LeCouk, was a child of the Holocaust, rescued from Germany in 1935 by invitation to study at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. By the 1980s, Rabbi Schaalman was a prominent Chicago religious leader and activist and invited to teach at CTS. The principle that religious leaders need to understand traditions other than their own became embedded throughout the curriculum at CTS. CTS's commitment to interreligious understanding was integrated into the mission and commitment statement of the institution and in all that we at CTS do. We recognize our responsibility to educate and equip not only our students, but also others in the world to make space for a wide variety of life stances, beliefs, and religious traditions, of which we are a part. The annual Schaalman Award is given to a student who exemplifies these principles and models them in their lives and in their work. To start off, this year we are awarding 2 special mention prizes for outstanding work in the lead up to the winner of the award. The first is Maher Hussein for his reflection on interreligious formation through a program called Safer Nights. And the second is to Suleiman Aden for Faith at the Gate, a proposed initiative offering interfaith re-entry support for Somali Muslims in Minneapolis. This project will be supported with up to $500 towards the cost of its completion. So congratulations to Suleiman and to Maher. And now The Interreligious Institute at CTS, in coordination with the Interreligious Committee at CTS, is excited to announce the awarding of the 2026 Rabbi Herman E. Schaalman Interreligious Leadership Award to Jimmy Payton. Payton's award-winning submission, These Are the Names, is an immersive audio installation conceived as a sacred space for mourning, reflection, and interfaith solidarity. The project confronts acts of religious terrorism carried out by white supremacist and Christian nationalist extremists by honoring victims and lifting up shared teachings of peace across faith traditions. The award comes with a $1,000 honorarium. Congratulations, Jimmy. And now I want to welcome our Schaalman Award winner, Jimmy Payton, to say a few words about his project and the value of interreligious work.
Thank you so much, Munir. I want to start by just saying peace, salam, shalom, shanti, be unto y'all, as we say here in Durham, North Carolina. This project really emerged from reflecting on the ways that violence is upheld in and by liturgies of society. And I wanted to use my skills as a social practice artist to lift up a liturgy of nonviolence comprised of wisdom from many different traditions and life stances. Excuse me. And that's the purpose of the project, which is a sound sculpture, or as my colleague, he's really my boss, the Reverend Dr. Luke A. Powery has called it, a sonic icon. In Durham, I've already got several congregations and synagogues and masjids and nonprofits who have offered to read names of people who have been murdered in acts of terroristic anti-religious violence, as well as several religious leaders who have agreed to read texts from their traditions and life stances in the original languages, in order to create a tapestry that weaves together this wisdom juxtaposed with the senselessness of terroristic anti-religious nonviolence. Engaging in this work, which there's still a long way to go on this. I don't anticipate completing the project till the end of this year, but I've learned a lot of things, and there will be many more things to come, but just a few things that have been sort of swirling in my head. One, I'm just grateful. The institutional backing of CTS has proven invaluable. I used to work in sales, and sending a cold email to somebody who's very busy, in my case, a busy imam with the subject line that says, a Durham seminarian seeks your wisdom, that might get the email opened, but having that institutional backing has helped me get into the room. It's helped people open the door, and they've shared and they've offered their space, their time, their voices. And it's essential, I'm finding, to connect with and consult with the community's wisdom keepers, and I would even argue religious gatekeepers, when doing a project like this, because without their knowledge, without their investment and wisdom, it's really kind of rude to proceed. You miss a lot, right? And so that's just one of the reasons why interfaith work like this is so important for seminarians. In each conversation, the community starts to change you. As a seminary student, we wrestle with really big ideas. But it's important not to just wrestle with those ideas in the classroom, but in context. I spend a lot of time in Christian contexts, but by lifting up this universal ideal of nonviolence within particular traditions and life stances, many and most of which are not my own, I become transformed. And so it becomes about the process more than the project, or more than the art, which in turn informs my approach to exhibiting a project like this, instead of just putting the art out there and making a statement or having people react to it. There's a way to provide space for people, to help bring dialogue about, to help answer questions. And that is why interfaith work is so important for seminarians. And when doing work that engages with the cloud of witnesses, or the communion of saints, or the ancestors, my friend and Durham resident, the Reverend Dr. Chelsea Brooke Yarborough Gill, has reminded me that it is very important to consult with those who have gone before, rather than objectifying their work to serve the project or the agenda or the argument. And so that's another lesson that I've learned, and that's why interfaith work like this is so important for seminarians. And there's just a few of the things that I'm learning. There will be so many more things to learn. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to engage Durham's many traditions and life stances as a chaplain in training and as an artist. And receiving this award has helped change the trajectory and tenor of my ministry, my theological imagination, and has really put me in spaces that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to get into. And so that's, again, why this is so valuable. I have a few thank yous. I'm trying to stay under the 3-minute limit. But I would like to, first and foremost, just thank you to Chicago Theological Seminary. Thank you to the leadership of CTS and Bayan. Thank you to Rabbi Schaalman and Dr. LeCoque for their legacy. Thank you to Kim Schultz and Dr. Mikva and everyone in the Interreligious Institute for giving us so many opportunities to engage across faiths. And a special thank you to Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva and Reverend Dr. Christoph Ringer for leading the Justice at the Intersection study tour last summer, and hopefully more in the future. I haven't looked at the course schedule for the summer yet, but without that course, this idea wouldn't exist. Without that course, without that experience, without that study tour. And so just thank you for all the work that went into that, because that was truly transformational. And thank you, most importantly, to my classmates, the cohort here at CTS, for all the ways that we teach and learn with and from one another. I am so grateful, and peace be unto y'all.
Many, many congratulations to you, Jimmy. We look forward to hearing more about the project as it unfolds. What you've experienced tonight, this lively conversation, our celebration of Jimmy Payton's work, is a reflection of who we are at Chicago Theological Seminary. 170 years of daring faith in dangerous times. We are a community that is willing to ask hard questions, to cross boundaries, and to imagine a more just and faithful world. But what has sustained CTS across generations is not just ideas. It's the people who believed enough in this work to invest in it, the people who understood that courage requires resources. In this moment, we are called to be both rooted and nimble, honoring the legacy that we've inherited while building something new for the future. That kind of work doesn't happen by accident, but it happens because a community decides it matters. So tonight, I want to invite you, simply and directly, to be part of that work. If what you've heard and experienced here resonates with you, if you believe in forming leaders who are courageous, justice-centered, and deeply engaged across traditions, then I ask you to support CTS. Your gift helps ensure this work not only continues, but grows faithfully, creatively, and boldly for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chad. And thank you for all of our guests. What a fantastic evening. And I have a little surprise for you. We're not done yet. I do want to say how grateful I am for Dr. Manseau, for Peter, for this conversation with Dr. Braxton. Congratulations to Jimmy. It's been a really fantastic evening. So there's two things coming up before we're going to let you go for your night. If you can hang on just a few minutes longer, I think it might be worth it for you. The first is that my colleague Chad had just mentioned your support to help us do continued interreligious engagements like this at CTS. And one of our initiatives in the past several years has been our podcast, Our Seven Neighbors. This season is our 5th season, and we are thrilled this season to have Reza Aslan hosting this year for what a season we're entitling Religion and Resistance in America. And we want to just play a quick trailer for you. You might hear some similar themes, and I think it might be of interest to you to take a listen to this this season when we eventually launch it after your engagement with this lecture. So if I could just bend your ear for a minute with this trailer we're going to play for you whenever you're ready, Roxy.
My name is Reza Aslan, and I'm hosting Season 5 of Our Seven Neighbors at Chicago Theological Seminary. We're titling this season Religion and Resistance in America. As we mark our nation's 250th anniversary, this season explores the long contested history of religious diversity in the United States. Not as some feel-good celebration of pluralism, but as a hard-won achievement forged through conflict, exclusion, resistance, and moral struggle. Against the rising influence of Christian nationalism and the persistent myth that the U.S. was founded as a singularly Christian nation, this series offers a corrective, grounded in historical reality. Through the stories of America's religious neighbors, we examine how multiple faith traditions and those who challenged religious authority altogether have shaped public life, law, culture, and conscience, often in the face of persecution and violence. Religious diversity did not emerge naturally or easily in the United States. It was argued for, fought over, suppressed, defended, and reimagined again and again. By tracing these struggles, our Seven Neighbors insists that pluralism is neither inevitable nor secure, but a fragile civic practice that must be understood, protected, and continually renewed if democracy itself is to endure. Join me.
Our Seven Neighbors, Season 5, Religion and Resistance in America, brought to you by the Interreligious Institute at Chicago Theological Seminary. Find it everywhere you find your podcasts. Coming soon. So there you have it. That was our premiere of the trailer here at the LeCoque Lecture. We hope that you will tune in. We plan to drop episodes starting in April. And pro tip, Peter Manseau is featured in the first episode. So he digs deeper into this conversation. So if you want to hear more, listen into episode 1 with Reza and Peter in discussion. So thank you so much. I want to, before we close out tonight, our very special guest is here with us. And so we are honored, I'm honored to welcome Junada Petras. Junada is the 25-26 Minneapolis Poet Laureate, appointed to a 2-year term to amplify community voices, especially Black and queer narratives through poetry. She's a creative activist, writer, playwright, and multidimensional performance artist who is born on Dakota land, West Indian descended, and African sourced. Her work centers around Black wildness, futurism, ancestral healing, sweetness, spectacle, and shimmer. And with all the pain so many of our communities have been experiencing lately, in cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul, we all know it has been truly amplified. The citizens there, our neighbors, clearly demonstrated exactly how it is that we can show up for each other in these times of what we are living through. So it is extra special to have Ms. Petras, a Minneapolis native and poet laureate from that city, speak to us tonight in her poetry. So if you would please welcome Junada Petras. Thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you all so much for being here, for inviting me, and just getting to hear about all of these stories. And as a person who is from Minneapolis and has really been devastated and inspired mutually by what has taken place in our city. Yeah, every affirmation and glimmer of, just love, in these collective ways is meaningful. I'm from the community, South Minneapolis, where, George Floyd was murdered, and Alex Preddy and Renee Good, South Minneapolis. And yeah, being poet laureate feels like such a important honor and inspiration in this moment to, like, just learn how to process all this stuff. So anyhow, I'll read this poem that I wrote for my city in the midst of, what we've gone through in the last couple of months. And it's called South Side, Soft Side. If it was up to them, the world would have no mamas, just mother wound. No dreams, just nightmare. No poetry, just profit. No passion, just power. No water, just drink the ache. Just exist small, small. Just wait until heaven. Just be grateful. This plantation is your paradise. Just be grateful. Every day feels like a 3-card Monty with the soul of the universe. Is it too much to ask to come to this planet and expect softness and stillness? To have a life centered around mundane, to move on divine timing and sensual clarity. Can't sleep because you're wondering if they will snatch you in the street, on the way to the job, to your child's school. You can't sleep, you wondering who is getting snatched in the night. Mothers have to trust the softest parts of their hearts in the coldest and hardest world. Sometimes the way to tend to that existential dread is to be soft places for other mothers' children. Queer people are magical at making mothers from everything, making temples of love in the heavy void. You know there's monsters everywhere. You trust that angels are everywhere too. You snuggle your child extra tight for all of those who can't hold their sweet babies in their arms. Mothers hand their babies off to other women to drive their kids to school so that when their kids return, home will be home. People are hiding in their houses, afraid for their face to see the sun, afraid that their brown and their darkness make them seen and targeted and hunted. In this country, you get paid 3 times as much to take children away from their parents than you get to teach them how to read. This is not new wound. This is an old and well-recycled wound. Those that were hunting and those that were hiding and scared and so many who resisted. Black women in shackles comforting other people's children from their bodies. Native children in boarding schools, mouths forced into white man's shapes, whisper and dream their true tongues. At Stillwater Prison, in a classroom of Black and brown and white men, Muslim, Christian, witchy men, brothers, comrades, a coven behind walls. I asked them what's a mystical creature they could be. My student, who was born in another land but now lives behind the bars of this country, says hummingbird, flickering electric blue wing. He held out his hand to show how small, simple, and harmless their needs are. Whenever I see or think of a hummingbird, I know it's my grandma Pearl visiting me, talking to me in flutters, soft giggles, Florida water, royal blue 7-day candles, and calypso, stewed canned salmon with onions, garlic, tomato, and thyme, swift hands. She doesn't speak American to me. She speaks to me Trini and languid. She speaks to me about other worlds, lands, and feelings, and how she travels everywhere now, how she belongs to the universe. South Side is the universe. South Side kids can have mullets, hijabs, beads, and fades. South Side kids can have parents who pray to every kind of divine understanding. South Side kids dance to old school music and under the wings of majestic puppets. And the sound of their footsteps shudder the asphalt beneath them. And under the cement and gravel and earth is wound, is a thing people stop talking about, is a thing that haunts and holds and freezes. South side, we outside. South side, we soft side. It's a small ask, but a certain one. To be held in a hug that doesn't feel like it will ever let you go. A type of embrace that allows you to melt away all ego and armor and to be a vulnerable, human, supple thing. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so, so much.
I didn't grow up within any one religion. My mom once told me that when I was a little girl, I ate the rice on my grandmother's Buddhist shrine. When I was in foster care as a kid in a small lumberjack town, my foster parents sent me to a Bible camp every summer. And when I was 13, the evangelical church said I could be born again. So I chose to be baptized. But then I was told homosexuality was an abomination. I didn't grow up with any one religion, but I grew up with God, who was my protector and fills my cup when I feel empty. God loves me through all my mistakes, all my faults. God has loved me through it all. But what I realized is that while I didn't grow up in a church, I did grow up in an American society that projected a narrative that was hurtful. It's a narrative that encompasses the sound bites of an angry and jealous God, a judging God who condemns the ones who don't fit into the box of social and political expectations. And because of this narrative, I paid more attention to people like Maya Angelou, who said, "While I know myself as a creation of God, I am also obliged to realize and remember that everyone else and everything else are also God's creation. Also, the Dalai Lama, who says it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. What matters is how you treat one another with compassion and respect. And in the Tao Te Ching, it says, in the way of heaven, there is no partiality of love. It is always on the side of the good man. Also, I find peace in reciting the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum for compassion and wisdom. And on a daily basis, I pray Psalms 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Spiritually, I look to many sources around me for comfort, wisdom, and guidance because I understand a greater narrative that has a greater meaning, that God is love, that we are to love one another. And if you're going to believe in anything, believe that how you treat each other and how you treat yourself matters the most. No matter how you define spirit, God, intuition, share kindness in everything you do. I am a Christian, I am queer, and I actually may be a Christian Buddhist if I'm going to label myself. But what matters more than my religious label is what I believe in. And I believe in kindness because there is no single reason why any human should harm anyone else or hate another or cause violence on another, especially in the name of God. And I'm starting to believe that we have to be on the offense of sharing words of love and kindness, that we have to share this message of love and kindness with bold and loud voices because our world really needs it. No matter where you come from, what you've done, what you've been through, or who you pray to, spread love and kindness. Take a moment and pause before you want to say something hurtful, and stop yourself before you want to say something hateful. And if you're going to believe in something, believe that you matter and what you say matters to the person who hears it. I hope that the messages from today's lecture resonate in your hearts and vibrate to those around you. I hope you know the impact you make by being here, being present, and being you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Congratulations to Jimmy on your award, and a heartfelt thank you to Peter Manseau, President Braxton, Dr. Terrell, and Junada. Peace and blessings to you all. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. Good night.